We know he's against the European Union and he's not that keen on a lot of immigration either. But what else does Nigel Farage stand for? We'll be putting UKIP's policies under the spotlight. With us for the duration, the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Now, first this morning, let's talk about defence, because a little earlier, the Defence Secretary, Philip Hammond, outlined the latest round of cuts to the armed forces. Around 1,400 soldiers are to lose their jobs. Here's Mr Hammond in action in the Commons.
Mr Speaker, for the men and women of our armed forces, I know that this has been a painful process. But completion of this final tranche will mark a turning point. With the bulk of our troops back from Afghanistan by the end of this year and coming back from Germany over the next 4 years, as we build Future Force 2020, they will be able to enjoy the peace of mind that comes from belonging to armed forces that have put a period of change and restructuring behind them and are focused on building their skills and capabilities for the future.
Well, that was Philip Hammond, the Defence Secretary. Nigel Farage, this latest and final round of cuts will end a period of uncertainty for troops in the army. Do you agree?
No. Whoever would have thought that a Conservative-led government would slash the army to its smallest size since Queen Anne and turn Portsmouth effectively now into a museum from a naval dockyard, and people are wondering, how is this going to work? Hammond's plan is you cut the number of regulars and you rebrand a territorial army as the Army Reserve and you build that up to 30,000 troops. It isn't going to work.
Why not?
Well, I mean, I've got family involvement in this. My father is president of a territorial army regiment in London, and he says the problem is employers were OK about a fortnight's camp every year, but suddenly the TA in the last 10 years has meant 4 months here and 5 months there, and we're trying to get a full-time army sort of on the cheap through the reservists, and people are going to struggle. Employers are not going to want their people to be in the Army Reserve, and this really isn't going to work.
Now, we have spoken, as I'm sure you can imagine, to ministers and to some MPs who serve in the armed forces as reserves, and they say it can be squared. This will be a sign of a modern army, that looking ahead, employers will be convinced to come on board to support this.
Let's sit here again in 6 or 12 months, and I feel very confident in saying that the Army Reserve will not be able to recruit the numbers that it needs to make up for the huge reduction in regular soldiers.
All right, so let's leave that to one side. Let's look at the numbers. How big would the army be under UKIP?
Well, I mean, we've been running at around about 100 to 120,000, you know, for some time.
It's going to come down, I think, to 82,500.
We're now slashing it down to 82.5, and whenever people say that this is the final cut, I'm not sure that's greedy with anything other than scepticism.
Right, because you think post-2015 they'll look again at cuts. Is that right? I
think defence cuts have been the easy way for government to cut. You know, we're now spending less than 2% of our entire budget on defence. It is really very, very low indeed.
But UKIP themselves, you, have said that you wouldn't want to be involved in the sort of conflicts that we've seen in the past. So what's the necessary...
No, this is extraordinary, this whole debate, you know, because UKIP does not want to get involved in endless foreign wars...
like Afghanistan or Iraq.
...doesn't mean that we want to slash our defences to the level where...
Why? Wouldn't it be practical and cost-effective to do so?
Let's just say... And OK, the Falklands is much more heavily manned than it was 30 years ago. Let's just say the Argentinians did establish a toehold on the Falkland Islands, and we had to try militarily to get them back. We simply couldn't do it. So the point about having defences and being able to defend yourself is that you are there for the unforeseen event. You know, it's like paying the insurance on the house in case there's a fire. It is folly not to do so.
But having said you wouldn't go into those sorts of adventures, if you can call them, would you not have gone into Afghanistan?
I have failed to see with all of these wars, frankly, what our objectives were. And in the case of Afghanistan, all you had to do was spend 5 minutes reading history to understand that it was actually unwinnable anyway.
So you wouldn't have gone into Afghanistan, you wouldn't have gone into Iraq?
No, Iraq was a vengeance war, and I'm afraid we'll finish up with a 3-state solution in Iraq, but it'll probably take 15 to 20 years of some kind of horrible civil war. I certainly wouldn't have bombed Libya, and I don't think anything we've done, frankly, in the Middle East has made anything more stable or better.
And then I come back to the question, then why do you need such a big armed forces for
Because
something
you don't know.
That may never happen and actually is unlikely to.
In some ways, you know, since the Warsaw Pact disappeared, the world is an even more uncertain place than it was before. At least then we knew what the potential enemy was. I think it is.
But you're saying you wouldn't get involved in these actions.
Well, there are some wars that you find yourself unavoidably getting dragged into. And, you know, here we are 100 years ago from the start of the First World War. The week before it, nobody thought it was imaginable. A week after it, it seemed inevitable. We just don't know.
Right, and just finally, the former US Defence Secretary Robert Gates said the armed forces cuts here will diminish the UK's military standing and reduce its ability to be a full partner to the US. Does that matter?
I think it does. But the point about being a full partner to the US is that when they say jump, we don't always ask how high. After all, Harold Wilson, when Lyndon Johnson came to Downing Street, said, no, we're not going to Vietnam. The point about a special relationship is we can choose when it's right to do things, when it's not. Gates's point is that hereafter, the US will not look at Britain as being a serious player.
All right, let's leave it there. Now it's time for our daily quiz. And the question for today is, which of these has the largest number of followers on Twitter? Is it A, our guest of the day, Nigel Farage? B, the official UKIP Twitter feed? C, UKIP weather? There's a theme going on here. Or D, Godfrey Bloom? Now, this show is obviously watched by millions, so the answer could well change by the end of the show. Don't look at me like that, Andrew. In which case, Nigel will have to take the answer as it was at the time of writing, which was about 9:30 this morning. Compliance at its best.
Oh, that's very technical. You don't need me to tell you that Nigel Farage is UKIP's man. He wants out of the EU, and that he's not particularly big fans of lots of immigration. But what else does UKIP stand for? Joe's been up all night going through their policies with a very special fine-tooth comb.
I'm exhausted. Nigel Farage is the political outsider who wants to change the system from within. And this revolutionary has plenty of other battles to fight and rights to right. The party is promising to reveal very soon how it intends to reduce £90 billion from our annual expenditure without reducing major public services. They aim to keep tax as low as possible, although there's not much detail as to how they're going to do it. Their pensions policy is as yet unclear, although at the last election they promised a flat rate, non-means testable, non-contributory, non-taxable citizens' pension of £130 a week. On crime, they promised not to reduce spending on frontline policing. And they say they'll have a tougher sentencing policy. Life will mean life. On health, they'll restore free eye and dental checks. And a UKIP government would make sure doctors' surgeries stay open in the evenings. Climate change is so last century, according to their energy spokesman Roger Helmer. Green taxes will be scrapped and nuclear power promoted. More money will go into the defence budget, although they say a UKIP government would be less likely to get involved in foreign conflicts. Finally, UKIP support more grammar schools, and they would bring back the student grant. Of course, it's over a year until the next general election, and UKIP say a lot of their policies are still under review. So just how revolutionary will Nigel Farage's UKIP be? Andrew.
Thanks, Joko. We're joined now also for this discussion by the Conservative MP, Priti Patel. Welcome to the Daily Politics. So, comrade...
I've never thought of myself like that, I must say. Thank
you will now. There's an awful lot of policies there. Will any of them make the manifesto?
Wait and see is the answer to that. I mean, we have... Clearly, our job is to fight the European elections on May the 22nd on the big, not just the constitutional question, but the consequences of being an EU member, whether that's on immigration or the effects on the City of London. And we will focus absolutely on those things between now and May the 22nd. What UKIP has to do over the course of this summer and going into the autumn is to show people that it has a domestic policy agenda that adds up. And to do that, we're going to have to show where cuts can be made, considerable cuts can be made to current government spending, but we're also going to have a strategy for growth. Because I think that is one of the things that this government, you know, there is some growth in the economy, but actually what we will do is talk particularly about the 4.5 million small businesses and what could be done to get some growth there.
Well, at the last election, you wanted to cut 90 billion of taxes and spend an extra 30 billion. There's going to be too much scrutiny on you at this election, I suggest, for you to get away with an obvious nonsense like that.
That's not. I mean, that is not an obvious nonsense.
Really?
If you can actually show show where the cuts can come. I mean, clearly, anybody that's working for a Quango or anybody that's earning six-figure money in local government, of which there are a very large number now, is not going to be voting UKIP. We think that whole, since '97, that whole public sector part of our economy has just ballooned out of control.
Yeah, but 90 billion cut in taxes, 30 billion extra spending means that you have to find 120 billion to do that.
I know that.
That's not realistic, is it?
It's very ambitious. Let's see.
That's another word for not realistic.
I don't defend the 2010 manifesto. I didn't put it together.
Right. So it won't be.
I was just a candidate. But I can assure you of one thing, that the 2015 manifesto will be similar in flavour.
Do you still plan to have a citizen's pension?
Well, this idea, in fact, has been taken up by a large extent by Ian Duncan Smith, so we've been sort of slightly ahead of our time with that.
So you won't have that now?
But the pensions, we have not decided what we're going to do.
All right. You wanted to scrap employers' national insurance. That costs about 60 billion.
Well,
Will
I
you
think
still
actually,
do that?
I think actually, particularly for start-up companies, the idea of a holiday where you don't have to pay employers' national insurance would be a very good short-term boost.
Yeah, sure, but you wanted to scrap it all for 5 years.
No. That absolutely. I remember what that manifesto said. It said that was a long-term ambition, but not.
Well,
something,
you said the manifesto said you would phase it out
achieved.
for employers, or not for people, but for employers over 5 years, recouping revenue through PAYE, corporation tax, sales tax revenue,
I would say,
and lower spending.
That's
pretty
that
specific.
I would describe that as an overly ambitious view of what could be done in 5 years.
All right, you once wanted a flat rate tax system. Now you want a two-tier system. What do you think it will be in the manifesto?
No. We want flatter, simpler, lower taxes.
Flatter is one thing, flat rate's another. That's one rate. What do you want?
We have a tax code in this country that is now 12,000 pages long.
Oh, no, we know how...
We want that radically reduced, and whether we have one rate of tax or two rates of tax, it'll still be a damn sight simpler than the current system that we've got. And the really important thing about tax is our concept of no tax on the minimum wage, and this is something that would actually incentivise people to get off benefits and to get back to work.
You also want to cut the Quango budget, which is reckoned to be about 60 billion. Would all the Quangos go?
Well, I think an awful lot of them will.
But wouldn't a lot of these jobs just have to be redeployed back into the departments? I mean, if you take, say, the Environment Agency, which is... people have mixed views about how it operates. It's a big agency, employs lots of people, big budget. You can't just scrap that and say that's it. A lot of these things would go back into the Department of the Environment, whatever it's called now, correct?
We've got these parallel structures now, haven't we? We've got
we've
got Whitehall departments, we've got Quangos. I think the argument for radically reducing and shrinking the size of our bureaucracy is very powerful.
Could you just, to indulge us, could you just give us one example of a concrete policy that will be in your manifesto?
Well, we're certainly going to fight very hard to bring back selective schools because we believe that social mobility has fallen to such a level in this country that the 7% who go to the fee-paying schools are now dominating everything. They don't, not just politics, current affairs, sport and everything else. So social mobility, we're very, very clear about
So
that.
by selective schools, you mean, which has been your policy, I think, for a while, is in that you would bring back grammar schools, correct?
They used to be called grammar schools. What we call them matters less than the concept
the
that we have.
The principle is the same.
The principle of having selection, yes.
Would you like to bring back grammar schools?
Well, I would like to see more competition in the education sector. There's no doubt about that. Well, I fully support academies, and I'm supporting lots of schools in my constituency to become academies as well. I'm not supporting a grammar school re-adoption programme.
No. And of course, you know, recently there was the big petition in Sevenoaks. There was the plan to have the extension, and Michael Gove's department vetoed it.
Would you like to get out of the EU?
Well, I mean, we're the party that's going to give a referendum on the European Union. Now, I've got long-held views and very well-known
Not that different from him.
Very well-known.
Are you sure you're in the right party?
Oh, I've been campaigning for a referendum, and probably a lot longer than Nigel Farage has, to be fair.
Let's not go down that road. You can't get out of bed in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I am proud to be a party that is slashing defence spending and adding $6 billion to international aid.
The one thing I would say is that it's my job, and I think it's the responsibility of generations such as my generation in Westminster right now, to come up with the right long-term solutions for this country.
But you can't be proud of that position,
But you can only do that in government, Andrew, and it's about making tough choices. To govern is to choose. You have to make some very tough choices.
Are you proud to be supporting a government that is slashing defence spending and increasing international aid?
I am part of a government that I think is facing up to the hard realities.
Well, actually, you're not part of the government, right?
Well, I'm part of a governing party that is facing up to the hard realities
but are you proud of
what
that?
is going on. I think we have to recognise the tough climates that we're in, notwithstanding the abhorrent mess
well, let me
that
come back
we
to
were
you.
left behind.
It's quite clear from the way a number of these questions have not been answered that she is quite close to you on a number of issues. So why are you going to run a candidate against her that will make it more difficult for Priti Patel to hold on to her seat?
Well, if Priti Patel says, you know, openly that she would defy a three-line whip, she would even vote against her own government on a motion of confidence to get Britain out of the European Union, then we might be talking.
What would you be talking about?
Well, there we are. It isn't going to happen.
But we're not going to have a motion of confidence of that nature. It's simply not going to happen.
I don't think anyone knows where this European debate's going to go, but I sense that for the first time in 20 years, it is now an absolutely frontline issue in British politics. I suspect that the Labour Party will be forced into offering a referendum as well. And I would say this, Andrew, you know, there wouldn't even be any debate about a referendum or any promise by Mr Cameron of a referendum, albeit he promised one once before, if you remember, unless UKIP had put the pressure on and got the votes in by-elections and local elections that we've got. So I think our very presence there, and perhaps the threat we pose, not just to Conservatives, but in many cases to Labour sitting MPs as well, is changing the debate in this country. You know, what you're talking about, Priti, what Cameron is trying to sell us is fundamental change to Britain's treaty relationship with the rest of the European Union. And I can tell you, as someone that spent 15 years in Brussels, that isn't even on offer. There is no possibility of that even being discussed. And I think one of the reasons that Cameron's pledge this time last year to hold a referendum hasn't united the party is that a year on, nobody actually knows what he intends to renegotiate.
Are you still in favour of regularly deploying the armed forces on the streets?
If necessary, yes.
You are, as a regular...
If necessary.
Part, because the emergency services need to be able to rely on the army forces, your website says, and they could, for example, man police stations while officers are out dealing with disorder, and worst case, provide direct support. You're in favour of that?
All this thinking is those flash riots that we had a couple of years ago came from nowhere, and everybody was astounded by the size of them and the lack of preparedness, frankly, that we had to deal with them. So this is a contingency.
You would have deployed the army then?
I think they would have been on immediate standby, yes, absolutely. That situation was really very serious indeed.
All right.
Under the last leadership, and in the 2010 election, we managed to produce a manifesto that was 486 pages long. So you can quote me all sorts of bits of it that I will not know, and that is why I've said none of it stands today, and we will launch it all after the European elections.
Is it still party policy to require our trains to be repainted in traditional colours?
Absolutely. I've never read that. I've no idea what you're talking about.
Putting Britain back on track.
Well, that was a policy paper published in 2010, not UKIP policy. The difference is this. Andrew can ask me about specifics of policy, and I can say we're not ready yet, but at least people know what we stand for. The difficulty Conservative voters have, they've no idea what David Cameron stands for.
I mean, I do disagree with that
Is he for wind farms? Is he against?
Well,
is he for a referendum?
I'm going to take issue with that.
What does he stand for?
I mean, the reality is...
he a Conservative?
Right, we better leave it there. Priti Patel, thank you for joining us.
You both suffered serious injuries in fairly recent times, and you've both continued with busy working lives. How have those injuries, asked Nigel first, how's that affected you in terms of the work you do and the schedule that you have?
Well, I mean, I was back in hospital in November. I had major surgery in November as a result of that last aeroplane crash, and I may have one or two more bits and bobs of tidying up to be done as the years go by. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's like everything in life, isn't it? We all go through bad things in life. It's about how we respond to them. And in my case, and I'm sure James's, a total refusal to accept that we can't go on doing what we did before.
Do you...
As the Syria peace talk in Geneva enter their second day, the dispute over how to deal with the humanitarian fallout rumbles on in Parliament. We're joined to talk about Syrian refugees by the Shadow Minister for International Development, Gavin Shuker. Welcome. How many refugees should Britain take in?
I think the government have got to decide that in discussions with the UN, but to give you an indication, France is a similar-sized country. They committed to take around 500.
Now, to many people's surprise, you suggested that we should take in more Syrian refugees, but you then rather spoiled it in some people's eyes by saying we should take in Christian refugees.
First things first. I mean, British values would have said to us for the last 2 centuries that when there are people genuinely fearing for their lives, that we have been the most accommodating country in the whole of the world at offering refuge to people. We've lost our sense of British values, and we're not having a proper debate about this because the two big political parties in this country have made such a mistake with total open doors to Eastern Europe that they're terrified of numbers, they're terrified of the immigration debate. So we open the door up to unlimited numbers from Romania and Bulgaria, and we shut the door to people who historically we would have given shelter to. So I was trying to make that argument. If we re-established our own immigration policy, we could get back to British values. My point about the Christians, Andrew, was this, that it's appalling for all of these people who've been displaced. And I mean, don't forget, there are 700,000 people currently sheltering in Turkey. So the burden on Turkey is absolutely enormous. And Jordan and all round. It's bad enough if you're Shia or Sunni and you've been displaced, but at least in the region, there are countries that you can go to. One of the big difficulties, and we're back to Iraq, where we started this programme off, one of the big difficulties is that since the invasion of Iraq, this whole region is becoming very difficult for Christians indeed. So I was really highlighting their plight.
Well, that would seem a reasonable point, because the Christians, I mean, they are now the most persecuted minority throughout the Middle East. You wouldn't want to go to Egypt now if you see what's happened to the Coptic Christians. So maybe we should. I mean, it's, you know, on the one hand, you think, well, that's sectarian.
Sure.
On the other hand, it may also be practical. Isn't he on to something when he said that you've let in so many people when you're in power, you're now terrified of what immigration does to your poll ratings, and that's why you've only got the guts to suggest 500, when you know you should be suggesting a lot more.
Absolutely not.
Time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz. Nigel, can you remember? The question was, which of these has the largest number of followers on Twitter? Is it A, you, Nigel Farage, B, the official UKIP Twitter feed, C, UKIP Weather, or D, Godfrey Bloom?
Well, UKIP Weather's very new, and I'm told enormous fun, so let's hope that it's that.
You know, you're right. The winner is UKIP Weather with 109,000 followers.
Wow.
You're on 103,000. So you could say cheers to that. Let me read you a couple of the tweets because they are great fun. UKIP Weather best tweets: council gritters are on high alert after a man in Peterborough went into a pub and ordered a glass of white wine. Amber flood alert issued for Tewkesbury after a man won £50 on a scratch card and said, "Oh my God," 3 times in quick succession. And finally, high winds at a garden centre in Kent after 2 men were spotted heading towards the plants without stopping to look at the ride-on lawnmowers.
Well, there you are. I think it's terrific.
You're enjoying.
Time for a drink, I think. That's it. Thanks to all of our guests.